The state's income tax increase kicks in, and Governor Pat Quinn defends his appointees. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the show where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Legislature's been gone for a while, but we still have plenty of issues developing in our state and elsewhere. And here to talk with me today about it, lucky for you, we have a new member of the crew here, a first time, Drew Thomason of Illinois Statehouse News. Worked in the Statehouse before, Drew, for the State Journal-Register and other papers with Gatehouse a couple years ago as an intern, and moved to Kentucky and came back. So welcome back.
Thanks, good to be here.
And of course, Illinois Statehouse News provides, newspapers and TV stations and radio stations with content across the state. Pat Yeagle is here from Illinois Times, who covers lots of things around Springfield. We won't mention them all here. Pat, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, sorry, nothing serious, but he wrote about a newspaper. And David Dahl, Statehouse reporter for Illinois Radio Network, which serves something about 55 stations across the state.
Yes, Bernie, thanks.
Okay, welcome. We have the tax increase was recently passed, of course, and Governor Quinn has been defending it, and various business people have been talking it down. And I guess I'll start with you, Drew, because I know you recently wrote about it. What has been the business reaction out there? Is this going to be something people will just get used to, or is this going to be a burden on a lot of folks for a long period of time?
Well, I talked to a couple small business owners, and it seems like they're worried that they're going to have to kind of pass this cost on to the consumer. They're worried that they say, you know, we can't absorb this tax increase. We're going to have to pass it on to you in order just to stay afloat, especially given the recession and kind of the general climate of the economy.
Yeah, the rough economy. You know, Governor Quinn, of course, continues to make announcements about good things that are happening, and that Illinois isn't that bad off. There's a steel company called Evrats Incorporated that's moving from Portland, Oregon to Chicago. It's bringing like 70 jobs to a corporate headquarters. And they say, the company head, that it's because they're in the center of the country, it's better for logistics. So, I don't know, Dave, who's going to win this battle?
I tell you, if I hear the name Mitch Daniels one more time, I'm going to rip out the rest of my hair. I mean, we keep hearing about how Wisconsin is going to poach the Illinois businesses, and Indiana is going to do so, and your paper and some of the others around the state had a full-page ad from the mayor of Indianapolis. So far,
that's economic development for Springfield.
For your paper, yes, those guys on 9th Street. So far, the only business that supposedly is really talking about moving is Jimmy John's, which is based in Champaign, and all he has said is, I've moved myself to Florida and I'm commuting to my headquarters in Champaign.
Yeah.
So,
and he's not going to close his restaurants, which generate the money. Yeah.
In terms of actually moving out, who's going to do that? It takes so much effort to, I mean, it was effort for me to move my household. So, in terms of the real cost, a lot of people are talking about it. When the dust settles, I'm sure we're still going to be talking about it, but in terms of it being the last straw, I don't see a lot of moving vans going out of Illinois.
Yeah, well, yeah, Pat, are you hearing any response to this whole situation?
Not really. You know, I think my experience with this so far has been pretty much the same as everyone else. You know, people are complaining, but I think it's just that. I think it's just complaining, and over the time, this cost will get passed on to consumers, but that's kind of what we expected to begin with. Illinois doesn't tax a lot of services, as we know, so I mean, we have to make that up somehow, and until the legislature decides to make that change, we're going to have to absorb it in these ways.
Yeah, now, of course, on past programs, I know for 2 years, for more than that, we've been, you know, whoever's at this table on a given week has talked about it. Will they pass a tax increase, or will the state go bankrupt, or somehow make payments to its vendors? So now that they are going to gain something more than $6 billion a year in new tax revenue, retroactive to January 1st of this year, and starting on an annual basis, you know, They're still in the hole because the budget gap was supposed to be something close to $15 billion, but it seems that they may be able to catch up. So you can argue they did the responsible thing, but there's still this political angle because only Democrats voted for it and all the Republicans said, we needed to cut more first or it's the wrong thing to do.
Quack, quack, by the way, 12 in the House and 1 in the Senate. Lame ducks. And they had the minimum, 60 in the House and 30 in the Senate. And they needed all those lame ducks right to the very last one to vote yes.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because clearly there are 4 new, or not all new, but there are 4 Republican lawmakers who had a press conference, including, I know Adam Brown from the Decatur area is one of the new ones, saying, newly elected member of the Illinois House, saying, hey, we need not to change the law or change the Constitution so they can't act this way in a lame duck session. Is that going anywhere?
The way the Republicans did in '96?
I think it was January '97, wasn't it, when they changed everything, including got rid of straight ballot voting?
Correct. It's interesting because they would have you believe, they being Mitchell, Barrickman, Rose, and Brown, 2 of whom are brand new, and Brown, who replaced a Democrat, Fleiter, in Decatur, they'd have you believe that what you should have happen is once there's the election, no more legislating, no more session until everyone is sworn in, and that would be December 1st. Of course, who would have to call the legislation that they're proposing? The Democrat-controlled legislature. So that's not going anywhere. Do they really want to have a freeze on it from Election Day to inauguration? I mean, they say they want that. Is that really going to happen? Is it really practical?
Well, it is interesting because lame duck sessions historically, as in this year, get some things done that are more difficult than people who are only there worried about their next election.
And all these January days popped on the calendar after Election Day. I think the House scheduled 8 days.
Yeah. Go ahead, Drew.
Well, what I think is interesting about the lame duck angle is that kind of the complaint is that you have these big pieces of legislation, death penalty repeal, pension reform, other things like that come up, and everyone says, whoa, we need to slow down. 2 weeks is not enough time to discuss this, to get all the points out. Yet if you look at what they do during the regular session, at the end of that, the last 2 weeks, it's the exact same thing, which I find kind of interesting.
Yes. And
these guys act with honor. I mean,
well,
they're never, as I said, I think the last time I was on, they're not going to be any farther from an election than they are at that time.
Well, I would just say that in the journalism business, I think deadlines push us too. I know that happens with me, which is kind of human nature. One other financial issue that is standing out there is that the Pat Quinn administration wants to borrow money to pay off some of the outstanding bills, and I think it's in, is it $8 billion range or $3 billion?
A little bit more than $8 billion.
Yeah, so where is that going now? Obviously that did not happen as part of the package as some were pushing for in the lame duck session. Now we have the new legislature in with more Republicans, however still Democratic control of both the House and Senate. Any thoughts on the chances of a borrowing plan going forward?
That's been reintroduced by Senate President Cullerton, and like any other borrowing that goes to the legislature, these bonds would have to need a 3/5 vote. So that means you're going to have to put Republican votes down. And shortly after the income tax was passed, the Republican House Leader Tom Cross held a press conference, and there he said, we might be able to vote for borrowing, but we're not doing that until we see more spending cuts. He mentioned workers' compensation reform, and he mentioned some other things. So I think what you're going to see is kind of the Republicans try to use that as a bargaining chip to get some of these other things done that weren't done in this past General Assembly.
Yeah. Interestingly, elections come very quickly in this state for House members, and actually for everyone because we're going to remap. So all members of the House and Senate are up in 2012. They're going to file for election like 11 months from now, probably this December for, I think the primary has been moved back to March. I think it's March 20th. Don't hold me to it, viewers. But we are only like 11 months away from filing for the next election. So already the Republicans have an issue that the Democrats voted for a tax increase and we didn't. I mean, can they also possibly do the same thing with borrowing, either holding it down or if some Republicans get on that bill, then it becomes bipartisan, and that's the only way it passes. So I don't know. I guess I just throw that out there.
Bipartisan? Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of that around here, and I wouldn't think that would happen, but who knows?
Okay, well, something else that didn't happen in the lame duck session as the Senate finished its business was the approval of some of Governor Pat Quinn's appointees, including Jonathan Munkin, who has spent a couple years, he's a veteran, I believe, of the Iraq conflict, and a young guy in his late 20s who was named head of the state police, but he has not been confirmed by the Senate, so he's been serving in an acting position the entire time he's there. Gladys Taylor recently became director of Department of Corrections, but also never approved by the Senate. And then there was a move by, I guess, Senator Cullerton's folks to say, we think that those folks can no longer serve because the General Assembly has changed. We didn't approve them. It's been too long. And then Pat Quinn just said, I'll reappoint him. It's not an issue. So what kind of game is being played and why?
Well, it seems to me, Bernie, that Cullerton's office and the others with him are trying to embarrass the governor because, as you said, all the governor had to do is reappoint them. The 60 days aren't up because they hadn't had the 60 meeting days. Somehow, people are wanting to, as I said, embarrass Quinn, mainly because of Jonathan Munkin, but maybe also because of Gladys Taylor. And another one who was reappointed was Manny Flores to the Illinois Commerce Commission. As I said, all the governor had to do was reappoint them and take the air out of that particular story. But it does seem like someone wanted to get out there that these people were somehow not qualified, and officially Cullerton's lawyer sent a letter to the controller, Judy Bar-Topinka, saying these people are not qualified to receive a paycheck. Don't pay them.
Right.
So the whole game, as you put it, is highly interesting.
Yeah. Do we have? Is there any indication? I mean, none of us, I don't think, have done any deep work looking into any of these folks. I mean, Jonathan Munkin had a press conference after the death of Springfield Mayor Tim Devlin, which he didn't give a lot of information and got some criticism for that. But and clearly, if you look on like a website of where state police or retired state police grouse a lot, you know, they're upset that their new director is someone who was not a policeman, even though he led like 100 missions in Iraq as a military guy, and Pat Quinn has great respect and wants to promote military guys. But do we have any real knowledge that these folks did anything wrong, or is this, again, the internal politics that is just embarrassing for Democrat on Democrat?
I think it's a lot more, like you said, the internal politics. I think Cullerton introduced a bill called the fumigation bill, meant to get some of former Governor Rod Blagojevich and some other, maybe even George Ryan appointees out that Quinn hadn't yet fired. So you've got to wonder if this is kind of a way of saying, look, Governor, you get rid of the people that we don't want in there, and we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and hold these hearings on the people that you want to put in, like Munkin.
Okay, well, we'll see where that goes. Yeah, Dave?
The whole culture of, for example, the police, it's kind of a brotherhood, and I could sum it up as saying, well, he's not one of us. In the same case in Chicago with Jody Weiss, who is not a uniformed cop. He was an FBI guy from Philadelphia. Again, not one of us, is not in the trenches. The military service doesn't count. And for whatever reason, Mr. Munkin made an impression on Governor Quinn. And the governor made him the state police director, but as you said, he's never been confirmed.
Indeed. Well, we'll see where that goes, because for now, they're serving, they're getting paid, and nothing has really changed. so we'll go on from there. The death penalty continues to be an issue that is hanging out there. The legislature, in its last days of the previous one, did pass a bill to abolish the death penalty, and Governor Quinn indicated at a news conference that he would listen to all sides, although he would take seriously the thought put into that action by the legislature, even though he has been a supporter of the death penalty in the past. Pat, any thoughts on where that's going? I know that, for example, Senator Durbin, who's on the federal side, just said this week that he thinks states should no longer impose the death penalty because you can't guarantee consistency and adequate lawyers for those folks. Any thoughts on what our governor will do?
I honestly think that he's going to end up signing it. He seems to me like a person with a heart for justice, and even though sometimes people criticize him for being inefficient or not ineffectual, sorry. I think he really wants to do what he feels is right, and I think that he will end up signing it. With that said, I know that he has a lot of reservations about, honestly, about making Republicans mad. He seems a lot like President Obama in that same regard. He doesn't want to make anybody mad. He doesn't want to have unnecessary conflict, so he sometimes doesn't do things that I think he wants to do secretly, but I think he will end up doing that.
The people who supported the death penalty repeal, I don't think the governors want to leave them hanging out to dry.
Yeah, what is he had 60 days from when they passed it, is that correct, to act on that?
I think you're right.
And he either, and if he vetoes it or changes it, it's done because we're in a new legislature now, so he either has to sign it or not.
Well, I think also kind of the other interesting angle to that story is that there are still people on death row, and this legislation wouldn't change that. They would still be, I guess, assigned the death penalty. Granted, there's a moratorium on that. So what you're looking at is if the governor does sign it, does he go back and then take these people off death row? Does he lift the moratorium? What does he do from there? So once whatever action he needs to take on the death penalty happens, there's still going to be some interesting fallout from that.
And there's a little gamesmanship in the Coleman case in the Metro East. The Joyce Meyer Ministries employee who was accused of killing his whole family. The prosecutors down there, and I'm trying to remember the name of the county. It's not St. Clair, but it's
Madison?
Could be.
Okay.
In Waterloo, Illinois
Not
is
sure.
where it is.
Should
And they're
know.
picking a jury from Perry County,
Uh-huh.
trying to get that through before a death penalty repeal becomes law because they
They want the death penalty
they want to fry
in
him.
this case. Interesting. Well, I know that the debate on this, in part, was how heinous certain crimes are. Of course, the problem is that that involves, like, killing a child. But in the last couple years, I think it was Will County, there were a couple of cases where fathers were charged with killing their kids, and then it turned out with DNA evidence that that was not the case, or with further evidence. So even when the crime is heinous, the question is, can you prove it? And the question is, can you prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And then if there's a death penalty involved, obviously the advocates of getting rid of it say you can never really know unless, obviously a federal situation or even a state situation like what happened in Arizona where everything's on film and everybody knows is there, but then you get into state of mind and there are always questions. So above our pay grade to figure this out ultimately, perhaps, certainly mine, but on we go. On a much lighter note, our new lieutenant governor from Southern Illinois, Sheila Simon, former member of the city council in Carbondale and daughter of late U.S. Senator Paul Simon, who was also once lieutenant governor, issued some new rules for herself and her office saying that we want to be very ethical. And in addition to putting out a kind of a review of her family's finances, of how they own her home and her parents' former home, but other than that, what their holdings are, which is not required by law. She also said that for she and her members of her staff, they will take no free lunch. In other words, if they go out with anyone, any lobbyist, anybody seeking anything, and for a meal or a drink, that they're not supposed to take any food or drink of any value. They'll just pay for it themselves, no free lunch. Good idea, bad idea? Oh, and she also won't take any campaign contributions from any state worker, not just her own workers. Also, not a legal requirement.
That is to me, the age-old debate of if it looks bad, is it really bad? And she's obviously saying yes, and the current laws don't go far enough for her. Right now, you can accept up to $75 worth of food a day.
Is that under the Gift
Be a
Ban
nice
Act?
lunch, that's what she said.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a nice lunch, by the way. Even
Where can you pay $75 for lunch in Springfield?
And in some places, a nice dinner. She said absolutely not, and that she wanted to go above and beyond what was there, and hoping that perhaps other officers will follow suit.
Well, there we go. You, Dave, were also at the inquest for Springfield Mayor Tim Davlin, not necessarily a statewide issue, but Mayor Davlin, who, as we now know, officially took his own life back on December 14th.
Mayor of the capital city.
Did have somewhat of a statewide impact in that he was president for a year of the Illinois Municipal League, which is the organization of cities, and also had been pushing for legislation to lower at least future pension benefits for police and firefighters, because cities get stuck with those costs, and it has been getting out of hand, according to he and others in municipal government. Just a little review of what happened at that inquest, and where do we go from here in that very unfortunate situation?
Where do we go from here? That's probably for the financial people to figure out frankly, the mess that he left behind and the mess that he was dealing with the Cousins estate. In terms of the inquest, it wasn't a great surprise to hear from the state police that he does believe that the mayor, with a revolver, a 6-shot revolver he called it, killed himself. The bullet went through the heart. Shortly after he made a 911 hang-up call, there was a cordless, the home phone, a landline phone, but a cordless handset was in the cup holder of his SUV. The mayor was in the passenger seat of the SUV, the motor running and the garage half open. The police responded to the 911 call that day. They found the mayor there, and there was no note. So no other real explanation as to the why. It's certainly germane to say that there were some financial troubles, and that very morning, the judge was waiting on Devlin to show up and try to answer how he had mishandled this Cousins estate. This estate that had been going on for 7 years. And it's interesting to note that from your paper, Bruce Rushton tried to get permission to tape record the proceedings, and the coroner said no, and he said, under what statute are you citing this? And she didn't have an answer, and so I have a feeling that there will be a little bit written about that.
Yes, well, Bruce is a knowledgeable reporter about open information, and I think is pushing us all forth as we go.
The jury came back and said it was a suicide, by the way.
Correct. Pat, you cover various things around town. How are things going in the aftermath of Tim Devlin? Obviously, we have a new mayor, Frank Edwards, in Springfield, who was alderman. He's running for alderman again, so it's only until the spring election that he's there. People over the shock of this whole thing yet?
Honestly, I think so. Going to city council meetings, things seem to be going, I don't want to say business as usual because that's not really the right term, but I think that people seem to be moving forward and not, dwelling on what was obviously a great tragedy. But I think that there are a lot of more pressing issues, and people understand that. We have major budget issues. The alderman and the mayor are trying to balance the budget.
Yeah,
and make
they
a lot
found
of
like a
cuts.
$10 million hole in the city budget, which
Yeah.
is a pretty big deal in the city budget.
That is a pretty big deal, and they're trying to deal with all this. And I think that they understand that there's bigger fish to fry than dwelling on something that ultimately will get hashed out eventually.
What I think the sad part is to take away is that as popular as Tim Devlin was, or seemed to be, apparently there was no one to whom he could say, hey, I'm really in some trouble here. And if there was someone like that, he didn't reach out to them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are still baffled as to exactly what was going on, and perhaps time will tell. As we move forward in this, in the wake of that other tragedy that happened in Arizona, there's been a lot of talk of civility in Congress, and next week is the State of the Union address by the President. See, I'm talking about a federal issue finally. And Senator Durbin of Springfield this week announced that he and Mark Kirk, the new U.S. Senator from Illinois, who's a Republican and Durbin is a Democrat, will be sitting together. Because if anybody's ever watched the State of the Union address, if it's a Democratic president, then the Democrats all get up and cheer and the Republicans are sitting. Or when it was President Bush, the Republicans often get up and cheer and the Democrats sit. I don't know if they'll be sitting up and down or not this next time, but there seems to be a movement to try to show that people are working together more. Any thoughts on how that'll go?
Well, I think sitting together during the President's State of the Union address and actually coming together to work on substantial pieces of legislation or actual measures are two totally different things. So we'll see if the talk of civility translates into reality, or if it's something that people obviously have been really affected by what happened in Arizona, if that's just kind of a knee-jerk reaction to it.
You put that a lot more civilly than I would have. It's not going to last. I mean, we had this coming together after 9/11, and
Well, Ray, and I know you used to work in Peoria, Dave, but Ray LaHood, who's now our transportation secretary under Democrat Obama, but he was a Republican congressman, he used to have civility getaways for retreats for members of the House of both parties so that they could spend a weekend together with their families and get to know each other better. So it could be more like the old days, but then people fought anyway.
I want to say that it was Hershey, Pennsylvania or somewhere like that,
It
some
might
kind
have
of a
been.
getaway. He convened at least one of those.
But
But
I think he convened a few of them, but then finally gave up because people kept being upset. Still, one indication of where we've come since that crisis is the U.S. House, which is now in Republican hands for the first time, even though the Senate is still Democratic, repealed or voted to repeal the health care bill that Republicans call Obamacare, and Democrats would use the nicer name for it, that insured care for. I'm not sure. I can't remember the exact name, but it's a lot nicer than kind of marking it with the president that some people like to not like. And Republican congressmen from Illinois voted against it, and Democrats voted for it. And where does that go? Does that change anything? Pat?
I don't think it's going to change much. I mean, it would still have to go through the Senate. That still is in Democratic hands, and they have no reason, to go against something that they've already approved. And really, I think that this is just political showboating. They're just, trying to find an issue that they know their constituents really like to, to harp on, and really like, as you said, like to hate. And I don't think it's going anywhere.
Okay, and we're just about out of time, and I don't know if your green sweater means anything, but does that mean you think the Packers will beat the Bears this weekend?
I have no opinion on football whatsoever, but I'm pulling for Illinois simply because I think we need it.
And there you go. And in Soldier Field, they'll be very happy if the Bears win, but it's going to be cold out there. With that, I think we have to leave it. So to Drew Thomason, Pat Yeagle, and Dave Dahl, thanks for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.